Right, so this is the third lesson in the networks unit, and this lesson is all about security. Now, there are different types of security, and there are different things we have to cover here. We're going to talk about ways we can protect our networks, and we're also going to talk about ways in which we protect the data on our networks. So, the first thing we're going to talk about is we're going to talk about access. Now, when you are a big bad system administrator in a school, what you do is you set up certain access rights. And the way we look at this is we look at this in a bit of an upside down pyramid model. There's my slightly off pyramid. And depending on how important you are, depends on where in the pyramid you fall. So if you are a student, you have a tiny level of access. If you are a teacher, you get a little bit more. If you are a head of school, like the head teacher, you get a little bit more. And if you are the system admin, you get the full whack. This is important to understand because obviously as a student we don't want you doing certain things that obviously could damage or break the network because there are malicious people. So maybe the only thing you can do is save files and do work. Now as a teacher we have to be able to mark your work, so maybe we have access to your files and our mark sheets. As a head of school, well, the heads of school have to be able to look at what I'm doing to make sure I'm doing it right. So they have access to my files. And as a system administrator, of course, you've got to set up and run the whole network, so you get control of absolutely everything. And this is really important because obviously system administrators have the most power in the network. That's why their passwords are the most secure. Now we've talked about passwords for however many years, and it's really important that passwords exist because obviously the more control you have, the stronger your passwords have to be. And I'm not really going to spend all day going over the strong password policy, but strong passwords. You have to know what a strong password is. And as a system administrator, you will be expected to change your password every 4 to 6 weeks to make sure that nobody gets your password, because if you have control of everything, then there will be trouble. Right, the next bit we're going to talk about is encryption. Now, encryption is a way of protecting the data that we have. Encrypt, T-I-O-N. Now, it's a bit of a dodgy word to spell, but it's really important that you understand what it is. Now, encryption is a way of making sure nobody gets your data. Okay, now it works on a principle of mathematics. Okay, if you are good at maths, you will be amazing at encryption. Okay, and the way it works is this. If we're talking about simple encryption routines, we could use a phase 1 shift algorithm. And the way that works is that if I type a message like hello world, and I wanted to encrypt it, I could then move every letter one letter further on in the alphabet. So H, I, E, F, M, N, L, P, and world is W, X, O, P, R, S, L, M, D, E. And this is encrypted now. That hello world is now encrypted into that message. Now, it's a very simple encryption, and it'll probably take somebody about 5 seconds to crack, because obviously you can tell that you've got a word with two ends next to each other, which means you must understand it. And that's what people spend a lot of time doing, trying to break encryption codes. Yeah? But by doing it, the only person who can get the right answer and be absolutely sure is the person who has the key. And obviously, over the last 100, 200, 500 years, people have become very, very good at writing encryption routines. And obviously, if you can imagine we write something that's even more complicated than that, then you would need a key to decode it. And depending on how strong your encryption is, you can have something that would be impossible to break or would take forever to break. So there is something called 128-bit secure shell encryption, and that will probably take you 1,000 years to 1,000 years plus with a computer to decrypt if you set the computer working on it, trying to find out a way of breaking it down. Okay, and the way it works is you send a message. So you have a comp with a key. Okay, and what happens is you send a message to your mate. And what you do is you send a message like this, and there's your MSG. And when your mate gets the message, he sends a message back and says, I got your message, what's the key? Now the trick is, if you are wanting to break that message, is you have to intercept this in the fraction of a millisecond that you've got, and this is your hacker. He intercepts the message and he pulls it down. And then he's got to send another message and fool the computer to giving him out the key. And that's really, really difficult. Okay? So that's why encryption's good. Because obviously then you keep your data secure. Now, the next bit is all about policies. When we work in schools, we have different policies that you have to adhere to. And they're depending on the policy, so the policies are important. So you have something called an acceptable, sorry, I'll say it right, use policy. And most of you will have this written down in your planners. The types of things that you're allowed to do and the types of things you're not allowed to do in the school. I'm not going to spend forever going over those different types of things. If you want to have a look in your planners. There's also something called a disaster recovery policy. And if you are a system administrator in a school, you need to have one of these, because this is concerned with backup. And what happens, should the school burn down, the system admin has to be telling me how to get it back, how to restore the data from the backup. What is he going to do to make sure? Okay, we have something called a failover policy, and that means should the server crash, what am I going to do to get it back? We've also got an archiving policy, which is basically, and again, falling back on the backup policy, which is basically saying how often do I keep my data. And the way this works is we're just going to quickly go through backup, but backup works very, very simply. The quickest and simplest way is called a grandfather, father, son. And what happens is that on Monday, I make a backup. On Tuesday, I back up the changes between Monday and Tuesday. On Wednesday, I do the same. Back up everything that's changed between Tuesday and Wednesday. On Thursday, I do the same. On Friday, Friday is different. Friday, I do a full backup. Now, if something goes wrong, what I'll do is I'll go, right, when did you last have your work? And you'll say, oh, I did it on Monday. I know I did it on Monday. Right, so I'll go back to Monday as a system administrator and I'll pull whatever's off the tape on backup. And that way, I've got that done. Now, should the school burn down over the weekend, disaster of disasters, what I have on Friday is I have last Friday's backup, which is everything on the computer. So that means then I can get it back really, really quick. It's happened to me, and I can have the whole, when I was a system administrator, if the whole thing went down, I promised that I could have the whole network back up and running within half a day if somebody gave me a new computer. And that was my policy, and that was how I did it. And I'd set everything in stone to make sure that that would be done. Okay, so that's really important. Right, the other way, and this is called an incremental backup. Incremental backup. And the reason why it's called incremental is because I work in increments. I only back up what, I only back up what's changed. And this is all, the incrementals are backing up what's changed. Right, that's the end of that quick chat. So we've got backup, we've talked about. We have to know about the different types of policies that we've got and what they all mean. We've talked about encryption methods. And also we've talked about passwords, how encryption works, and different levels of access rights. These are the things that you will need to know for the exam.